My name's Walt McClure. You've seen my name on your email, so now you know who the guy who sends you all that email is. It's me. And let me introduce you to Carol Quinn, who is the Deputy Director of Lobbying, who is going to take you through the rest of the presentation. So thanks again for coming.
So hi again, I'm Carol Quinn. I've probably talked to some of you on the phone. I'm the Deputy Director of Lobbying. So up here I have Christina Maffei, who's the Deputy Director of Compliance, and Brianna Kajana, who's the Supervisory Filing Specialist. I also have, and she can raise her hand, Kristen Abreu. She's an associate counsel. She actually is in our New York City office. She handles the legal questions that come in either by email or by phone, so some of you may have talked to her before, or you may have talked to me. So as you know, the lobbying regulations and the new lobbying application have been in effect for just about over a year. So today we wanted to kind of regroup and come together and try to provide clarification on the regulations in areas that we've gotten questions on. And we also wanted to address some common errors that are being done on the filing side of the fence, and also maybe mention the features that the Lobby app has to streamline filing requirements. Our goal with both doing the regulations and the new Lobby app was to simplify and clarify the Lobby Act requirements. It's still a work in progress, as we know up here, and we're still working with ITS to improve the functionality of the Lobby app, and we appreciate everyone's patience as we do so. We also plan to initiate a new rulemaking this year, hopefully to be in effect for the next biennial, so next January of 2021. This would be, again, to clarify a couple spots in the regulation that we think might need some clarification, and maybe to tweak our approach a little bit on the regulations. Now, that will be in a complete public SAPA rulemaking process, so I'm not going to really get into much of that today. I'm just going to try and highlight a couple of the things we're thinking of changing, and that will come forward sometime this year. So in the first part of my section on the regulations, I'm trying to do three things. One is I'm going over things you probably know about rulemaking. I'll quickly go through that. The second thing I'm going to do is to try to clarify parts of the regulation that we're getting questions on that might need some clarification. And I'm also going to highlight what I think are important things to know, even though they're not new. I just want to highlight and go through with you some of the features of the regulations that I think are important. And finally, I am going to highlight or flag parts of the regulation that we're considering changing. So I'm going to try to let you know what might be changing and what might be coming forward within the next year. But again, that would be a formal rulemaking process. So you'll get plenty of chance to comment on that. Again, before I get into the regulations in the Lobby app, I always like to take a minute to go through lobbying because really the lobbying requirements, what constitutes lobbying, is the backbone of everything we do, and it's connected to every requirement we have. Lobbying is a defined term. It's up here on the screen. It's an attempt to influence these activities and only these activities. Again, and this is something you already know, I'm just going to quickly go through it. There are two forms that lobbying can take, and that is direct and grassroots lobbying. The regulations go into great detail about both of those. Okay. So direct lobbying, that's your typical type of lobbying, your face-to-face meetings, your emails, your direct social media interactions, your maybe a memo or a phone call with a public official. The other form of lobbying is grassroots lobbying. I'm going to mention it a bit here today just because that is a key feature of the regulations, and we tried to clarify what is grassroots lobbying. And it basically is a communication that takes a clear position on a specific government action, a 1cc activity. It urges the public to contact the public official in support of that position. Now, this activity is grassroots lobbying, whether you call it an educational outreach or advocacy effort or whatever you call it. If you meet the requirements of a grassroots lobbying communication, it is grassroots lobbying. Now, example of this would be a billboard up on 787 that says, contact the governor to let him know that you support bill number XYZ, or you might describe the name of the bill. That would be a grassroots lobbying communication. Okay, I'm going to quickly touch on what makes lobbying reportable. Again, some of you know this, and I understand that, but I always like to point out some things within this that I want to clarify that I think are important. Okay, so in order to report lobbying activity, if you have a lobbying activity, you have to have two things. One is it's, again, one of those 1cc activities. You're trying to attempt to influence a piece of legislation, an executive order. The second piece, which is key, is that you are exceeding the threshold, the $5,000 threshold. I'm not going to dwell on this, but I do want to point out a couple things related to this. One is, with the introduction of the beneficial client into the regulations, we have gotten some questions on this piece. So once a lobbyist meets or exceeds the threshold, as you know, you're going to have to register as a lobbyist, you're going to have to do bimonthly reports and do some reporting. And it has to be done for every client you have. And for this, and when I say every client, I mean the lobbyist, the contractual client, and the beneficial client pairing together. This emanates from the same authorization or contract to lobby, and it is about the same issues or same purposes. So every client you have, you can't have one registration and one bimonthly report for everything. It has to emanate from the same agreement and has to be about the same activities. I think that's obvious, but we have gotten some questions, so I'm just going through that. The other thing I want to point out about this is if a client semiannual report is not required because they don't meet the threshold, the contractual client does not meet the $5,000 threshold, then any beneficial client listed on that filing does not have to do source of funding. They don't have to check the box that says they're under threshold or that they're a 501c3. They don't have to disclose sources if they have them to disclose, because there isn't a client semiannual attached to that lobbying arrangement. Now, so that's point one. Point two I want to say is that doesn't mean that beneficial client who might be on another filing might have to do source of funding there. I'm only talking about this particular arrangement, this particular agreement. If you're a beneficial client on this arrangement and there's no client semiannual report because the contractual client is under threshold, then you're not responsible to do the source of funding. We have gotten questions on that. Speaking of questions, too, I'm just going to interject here. I'm going to try to go as fast as I can through this, and I know it's dense material. We try to make it exciting, but it really is impossible to make exciting. So, and I'll go as fast as I can, and then Christina's going to go through the Lobby app. We're actually going to do a live demonstration of that, and I think that's going to be really useful. I don't know if we'll have time for live questions, but we are going to sit up here afterwards, and we'll stay as long as you want for individual questions. And we'll take them if we can. I just don't know if we're going to get through it all in time. So again, this is the threshold. Everyone knows it. It's $5,000. The only thing I want to mention about this is for the 2020 filings, we actually tweaked the drop-down list for the expenses. We have a detailed drop-down list for expenses. It might be things like social events, and it'll say social events / busing or social events / rallies. Maybe that's connected to a lobby day you might be reporting on. There is a great drop-down list. Please use it. It's important. It helps with transparency. It helps with the search functions. So I want to point that out. Okay. All right, so what's new with the regulations? I breezed through kind of the basics on this, and I want to get to more important things. As you know, 943, we spent like 2 years trying to do some outreach, trying to get comments from you. We tried to incorporate as many comments as we could. We came up with the comprehensive lobbying regulations. Our goal with this was public transparency and also streamlining things as much as possible for the filer. Those were our goals. So again, today I'm just going to address the common questions that have come up with the regs, and they're going to walk you through the Lobby app. I'm pointing these things out. I know some of this you know, but some people in the room may not. I just want to point out the key features of the regulations. Every registration and every lobbying report has to have both the contractual client and the beneficial client. The new regs, also another key feature is there's much greater specificity on lobbying targets, who you actually lobbied. We point out direct lobbying and how it includes door opening and certain activity conducted maybe at a lobby day. We have that in there. We also define grassroots lobbying, and we say it's reportable, and we describe how. We also have sections in here on the use of social media. We thought that was important since social media is being used so often these days. So we have in our regulations how it can be reportable and how to do that. We also define coalitions. That's another thing we got a lot of questions on, was coalitions. So we have in there filing options and reporting requirements depending on which option you take if you're a coalition. And finally, we tried to, again, streamline things as much as possible. A prime example of this is the auto-generated client semiannual report, which we'll go into a little bit later, but that's for if you lobby on your own behalf, you don't have an outside lobbyist, you're not going to have to also do a client semiannual. It's going to get auto-generated from your bimonthly reports, which has the same information anyway. Okay, so I gave a training, I think it was in 2018, on the regulations. And I'm going to state this again because I think it's the best way to look at lobbying and lobbying requirements. I think the best way to comply with the requirements, the best way to look at things, is to view it through the lens of who am I? So am I a client? And if so, am I a beneficial client or a contractual client? Am I a lobbyist? Am I an employed lobbyist? Am I a designated lobbyist? Am I a retained outside lobbyist? And does the lobbying involve multiple parties? So are there co-lobbyists? Are there sub-lobbyists? And what are the reporting requirements that attach to that role? And finally, am I a coalition? And if so, do I decide to file as a coalition or not? And what happens if I do or don't as an entity, as a coalition? So I always try to look at it that way. If you look at it that way, who am I and how do I report? I always find that's the best way to do it. So I'm a client. One of the key features, like I mentioned in the regs, was the idea of the beneficial client. So the concept of beneficial client, this was getting at who's the true client behind the lobbying. Before, with a third-party beneficiary, we found that a lot of the lobbying was not as transparent as it should be. So the concept is you have to put down a contractual client and a beneficial client on your filings, on every filing. They can be the same party. Oftentimes they are. It was, like I said, designed to close loopholes in source of funding and make sure the public really knows who the true client is behind a lobbying arrangement. So what do we mean by contractual clients? And again, I know you know some of this, but I am mentioning it just to kind of highlight it, and I will also mention things that we're thinking of changing. So a contractual client is the person or the entity that is responsible for the client semiannual report, except for the source of funding section of that. They are the party that signs the lobbying agreement or written authorization to lobby. They typically compensate the lobbyist, either the internal lobbyist, your employed lobbyist, or the outside retained lobbyist. The contractual client typically does that, but not always. And we've gotten questions on that because sometimes a beneficial client might be paying for part of the lobbying, but they're not the one that signs the agreement. Again, so the contractual client's on every filing. So I want to talk about this a little more because we have gotten quite a bit of questions, especially in the corporate structure scenario, the parent and the subsidiary companies, and who's a beneficial client and who isn't. We've gotten plenty of questions on that, which I'll get to in a second. So again, the concept of beneficial client, this one, again, is on every lobbying filing. You think of it as your true client. A beneficial client is a coalition member. If the coalition happens to be filing a lobbying report, they're going to put the members that meet that threshold. I'll get into that in a little bit later. But a member of a coalition can be listed as a beneficial client. An individual who lobbies on your own behalf, or an entity that lobbies on their own behalf. In that situation, that person is, or entity is, the lobbyist, the contractual client, and the beneficial client, all three in one. The beneficial client, again, key feature, they're responsible for source of funding. So there's the source of funding checkbox list or the disclosure of sources of funding. That is for the beneficial client, not the contractual client. So these are just important things to remember. And the regulations also make clear who's not a beneficial client. An example I'll give on that is we do get questions sometimes about trade associations. And how is that? How do you handle that? Who's a beneficial client in the trade association scenario? So the regulations actually exclude trade associations because if if the organization engages in lobbying for the benefit of members of a population or class, you're not a beneficial client. Great example of that is a trade association. So if a trade association's lobbying on their own behalf, or even if they retain an outside lobbyist, the trade association is the contractual client, and the trade association itself is the beneficial client. They don't list their members. Now, getting into the corporate structure, which is the questions we've gotten quite a bit. I feel like I'm getting it almost every day. When should a subsidiary company be listed as a beneficial client of a lobbying arrangement between the corporate parent and a lobbyist? The corporate parent might be lobbying on their own behalf, or they might have an outside lobbyist. These are the factors to consider, and these are the factors we consider when you call us. This is what we usually ask you. We'll say, is the subsidiary company benefiting from the lobbying? If they are, put them as a beneficial client. So in this scenario, the parent might be the contractual client. They're the ones that are signing the agreement. Who do they list as the beneficial client? They'll list the parent, because they'll list themselves, right? Lobbying's being done to benefit the parent. But do they list the subsidiaries? Well, we'll ask, and we can't answer that for you, but we will ask you, is the subsidiary benefiting from the lobbying? If so, put them down. The other question we might ask is the subsidiary paying for part or all of the lobbying? They might be actually directly paying a retained lobbyist. They might pay a portion of it. They might pay all of it. They might actually use their own subsidiary employees to lobby for, and they pay them to lobby for the parent. These are things we will ask. If that is the case, the subsidiary is either paying for a part of the lobbying or using their employees to lobby, we'll generally say, yeah, that's a beneficial client, put that down. There is the kind of in-between scenario where the subsidiary might be just a service company, might be a management company. They might just pay the bills for the parent. That's all they do. In that situation, I feel like that's a little more fact-dependent. I'd like you to call us and we can walk you through it. In that situation, you might not have to list that subsidiary as a beneficial client if really all the subsidiary does is provide service to the parent. All they do is like pay the bills or something similar like that. That's the one scenario that we've kind of given advice on that. You might not have to list it as a beneficial client, but I encourage you to call us on that. If the other two things are true, list them as the beneficial client. Okay, now I'm going to get into the lobbyist. Again, I'm viewing this through the lens of, okay, now I'm a lobbyist. What type of lobbyist am I, and what role do I play in the lobbying arrangement? These are the things, the way to look at things. The type of lobbyist, you could be an employee who lobbies for the place you work for. You could be a designated lobbyist. You might be a board member or a retained lobbyist, the typical outside lobbying firm. And then what role do you play? Sometimes you're a sub-lobbyist, sometimes you're a co-lobbyist. So what role are you playing in the lobbying arrangement, and what requirements attached to that? Now, I'm not going to get into really sub-lobbying and co-lobbying. We haven't gotten a lot of questions on that, and in the interest of time, I'm probably not going to touch on that too much. But I am going to talk about employed lobbyists. So these are your typical in-house lobbyists. The organization registers as the principal lobbyist, and they list on their filing those employees who actually lobby for the entity that they work for. I want to point out, here's where the auto-generated client semiannuals I mentioned before come into play, because if you're an organization or an entity and all you do is lobby for yourself, you don't hire an outside lobbyist, you're going to list the employees as individual lobbyists who do the lobbying for you on your filing, but you don't have to do a client semiannual. One will be automatically generated for you. And we'll get into a little bit later what happens if halfway through the year or halfway through the 6 months you, or in the second half of the year, for example, maybe you hire a retained lobbyist. We can get into that. But you would not have to do a client semiannual. You don't have to pay the filing fee if this is all you do. And that is, again, another streamlining feature. Okay, designated lobbyist. This is an area where we've gotten a decent amount of questions on, so I want to go through this. This is also an area we do plan to clarify the definition of a designated lobbyist in the rulemaking. We hope to do that. So our view is a designated lobbyist is someone who lobbies on their own behalf, or on behalf of him or herself, or someone who lobbies on behalf of a client, which could be an entity, and it could be you're a board member, an officer, or a director of an entity, and you're lobbying for them. So that's with respect to organizations. The key point here, and we have gotten questions on this, the key point to remember is if you're a board member, you're not going to be listed as an individual lobbyist on that entity's filing unless you actually lobby. And that's a very key point. I think people think that just because I'm a board member, now I'm going to get listed on a lobbying filing. That's not the case. Only if you actually engage in lobbying. So only if I walk into a senator's office and engage in lobbying on behalf of the entity that I'm a board member for, that's when I get listed. And of course, it is important to know who is meeting with senators on behalf of an organization. So it's kind of a balancing act, but that is when a designated lobbyist who happens to be a board member will be listed. But just because you're a board member doesn't mean you get listed on a lobbying filing if that's, if you don't do any lobbying. The other thing I'll mention is, even if you are a designated lobbyist, you're a board member and you do engage in lobbying, you're going to be listed on the lobbying filing, but you personally don't have to do anything. You don't have to do any of the filing. You just get listed. The entity itself, the organization that you're a board member for, they're the ones that do the work. They're the ones that actually do the filing. Of course, once you're listed on a lobbying filing, that does make a difference. You're subject to gift rules and things like that. That comes into play. But you personally don't have to register as a lobbyist. You personally don't have to fill out the lobbying forms. That's another thing I just want to point out. Okay, the other thing is your retained lobbyist. Everyone knows who this is. This is your outside lobbying firm, the most conventional, typical lobbying arrangement. Okay. Multi-party relationships. What happens if you have multiple parties? The regulations do clarify this. They go into detail on it. Who's responsible for disclosing what? And it does relate to what role you play if you're a co-lobbyist or a sub-lobbyist. I'm not going to spend time today. I'm happy to answer questions afterwards, but I just don't feel like that's a great use of our time today. This is just your basic, what the lobbyist is required to do, what the contractual client is required to do, and the beneficial client. We'll also have this slide presentation up on our website, and this is also getting taped, and that presentation will also be on our website. So if you have anything after this, you can certainly refer back to that. So I'm going to breeze through that in the interest of time. Okay, so there are a bunch of slides here that talk about the prime and sub-lobbyist, co-lobbyist situation. I'm going to breeze right through them. Again, they'll be up on our website for you to see. I'm going to go straight to coalitions. Okay. So another key feature I mentioned before was coalitions. We put this in the regulations because we did get a lot of questions on if I'm a coalition, what do I do? How do I file? Who's responsible for what? So in our regulations, we do define coalitions. This is another part where we are going to tweak the regulations. We're hoping to clarify that the definition, we're hoping to clarify a couple things. One is define a member of a coalition. We've gotten some questions on that. We view that to include an entity who gives money or resources or incurs expenses on behalf of the coalition. If you do those things, you're a member of the coalition. And coalitions are unique because if they spend more than $5,000 on lobbying, and again, let's all remember that all these requirements only relate if you're doing a 1cc activity and you spend more than $5,000. So I'm assuming that throughout the day. But if a coalition does that, usually if you lobby over $5,000, you have to register. We gave coalitions an option. And we did that to kind of strike a balance. We didn't want to discourage their formation. So we give them an option about whether they file or not. We tried to just strike a balance. So this is the definition. Again, we're going to clarify in the regulations, we're hoping to anyway, that instead of just saying pool funds, we're going to say pool funds or resources or something similar, because we do view that as, when you're pooling funds or you're pooling resources or you're incurring expenses on behalf of the coalition, you're part of that coalition. Okay, now this gets kind of in the weeds, but I am going to go over it a little bit just because we do get a fair amount of questions. Again, your option, if you're a coalition and you spend more than $5,000 lobbying annually, you have a choice. You can file as a lobbyist or a client or not. If you choose to file as a coalition as a lobbyist or a client, you're choosing to file as the coalition, you have to figure out which one of you in the group is going to be responsible for the filings. You're going to list beneficial clients, which is going to include any member of the coalition that spends more than $5,000 on lobbying. Or if you decide you don't want to do that, you don't have someone that wants to take on that responsibility, or for whatever reason, you're not going to have the coalition file as a coalition, then each member, again, the member of the coalition who spends more than $5,000 lobbying, that member is going to have to disclose the coalition activity on their filings, which I'll get into in a second. So let's say the coalition decides to file. If the coalition identifies itself as a lobbyist or a client, then they have to file the lobbying report on behalf of the coalition. And they're going to have to identify the responsible party. They're also going to have to disclose all members who exceed $5,000 on lobbying, and such members are the beneficial clients. So how do you do that? We have a questionnaire on our website that you can use. And you would only use this, so if you're a member and you give more than $5,000 to the coalition and the coalition is filing, I don't need to use the questionnaire. I'm the coalition. I understand that you're over 5,000 already. So I'm going to list you as a beneficial client. But if, for example, they give under 5,000 to you as the coalition, then you're going to use the questionnaire. They might give you $2,000, and then when they fill out the questionnaire, and you can rely on the questionnaire when you get it back, and they might have not reported anything because they're only spending 4 on their own. But 4 plus 2 is more than 5. So then they get listed as a beneficial client. So please use the questionnaire. It would help you. Again, this is just if the coalition decides to file. So the contributions to a coalition and when they count against you or towards your threshold or not is up on the screen. It's pretty self-explanatory, but if your coalition is filing as a coalition, then whenever I give as a member doesn't count towards my own threshold. Doesn't make me register as a lobbyist, unless I already have to, of course. But it's not going to count against me as far as the $5,000 threshold. It just counts towards me about whether I get listed by the coalition as the beneficial client on the coalition filing. But a key feature is whatever I give to the coalition always counts towards my own personal source of funding threshold, and if I have to do source of funding on any filings. That's just a key point. Again, it relates back to transparency and who's funding lobbying efforts. Okay, coalition decides, nope, they're not going to file. Then what happens with the members? What do? So the member contributions in this situation, it does count towards whether that member meets the $5,000 threshold and will have to file. It also, again, always counts towards their source of funding. So what happens? What does the member do? How do they report this coalition activity? So again, what we're trying to do is just make sure the public can figure out who's behind a coalition. We're just interested in the public being able to search and figure out, oh, this coalition for X, who's behind that? Who's a beneficial client? Who's a member? So each member in this situation who is required to file a lobbying report because they're over $5,000 as a member, or separately aside from the coalition, that's going to count. They're going to have to disclose in the report their own member contribution to the coalition, and they have to name the coalition in the filing. And where does the coalition member do this? Where do they report their activity? So this slide will give you where to put it. Again, if a member of a coalition that's not filing spends more than $5,000 lobbying in New York State, and it could be, in this situation, whatever they gave the coalition, plus whatever they do on the side, they're going to have to put that contribution somewhere. And this slide depicts where they would put it. And you can see where you'd either put it in your own bimonthly or you'd put it in your own client semiannual. You list it as an expense to X coalition, X amount to X coalition. We can get into that on the side if you have any more questions on that. Okay, so what's new with the regulations? What's new? What kind of lobbying are we talking about? Remember, there are 2 ways to lobby, like I mentioned before, and it's direct or grassroots. Had this up before. Everyone knows direct lobbying, direct contact, face-to-face a memo sent with my name on it, when you directly contact a public official. So the regulations, they clarify what's meant by direct lobbying through preliminary contact, and that's on the right side of your screen. What could be this concept of door opening? If you're going to open the door to one of your clients to a public official and you know they're going to lobby, that counts as direct lobbying. That counts as direct contact. The regulations also define direct contact. Again, you have to have direct contact with social media in particular. There has to be direct contact to make it reportable lobbying. Here are so the regulations also clarify what's not direct lobbying. You know, if you're just doing administrative work, if you're just giving technical information to the legislator, that's not direct lobbying. We have this in the regulations, and here are some of the examples. I'm just going to kind of breeze through that. Okay, now we're getting to lobby days. So this is another section of the regulations we are going to consider tweaking. We put a section on lobby days because we had so many questions on it. I think by putting it as its own separate section, in a way we overemphasize the lobby day. Lobby days are reportable if it involves direct contact. They were always a covered activity. We just tried to explain it because we were getting so many questions. But I think by putting it as its own section, perhaps we've overemphasized it. It really is just another example of direct lobbying, another example of direct contact. So that is something that we're thinking of clarifying. We hope to clarify in the upcoming rulemaking. And what we might do is just make it as an example. Here's another example, and we'll put in some examples about lobby days and how what you do at a lobby day could be direct lobbying. But right now, the regulations say this. Talks about employees or designated lobbyists of an organization that's conducting a lobby day. And it talks about how and why or who you have to identify as an individual lobbyist. And so an employee or a designated lobbyist, your board member example or a person who has to be listed as an individual lobbyist based on activity done at a lobby day, only if they make direct contact with the public official and they speak on behalf of the organization. So we have this in the regs, but we still get questions on it. If you just go to a lobby day, you're not an individual lobbyist that needs to be listed. Also, the organization that might be spending money on a lobby day, which is reportable, they don't have to list volunteers or mere members of whatever the organization is. So you bus in 100 people, you're not going to have to list those 100 people. They're just volunteers, they're members, they're not speaking and making direct contact. So those, like I said, we're going to simplify this in the regs, I think, by, again, pulling it back and just making, putting in some examples about how things done at lobby days could be direct lobbying. But I just want you to remember, but the principles I just described, that volunteers, that's going to remain true. We'll probably still have something in there that makes that clear, but these principles will remain true. Again, direct contact, if it's done in a lobby day or if it's done when you walk in the senator's office, like your typical lobbying, if you make direct contact on a lobbying activity, whether it's at a lobby day or somewhere else, it can be reportable. So,
To a legislator?
are they speaking on behalf of the organization?
Yes. I mean, I can't necessarily guarantee they will speak or they won't speak, but if they do, we now have to list their name on
I think, so is this a mere member or is this a board member?
this would just be, it could be both.
Okay, if it's a board member that speaks on behalf of the organization at a lobby day, yes, you have to list them. Now, you know, you do what you should do. You make, we know this is like, you won't necessarily know they did that. I understand that.
Yeah, that's what I'm just
But if you're
concerned about. We're not,
sending in
you know,
right, if you're,
we're not in every room during all
no,
the
of
meetings
course
we
not.
set up for them.
We're
So
also very reasonable about this. This is just what you should do if you know that your board member is going to speak on behalf, and they actually do speak on behalf. There could be a room, you could have 20 people in the room, there's one person that speaks. That's the person that you would list, not the other 19.
And then where exactly are we listing them? So
They're listed as individual lobbyists, so.
under
on
our
your
like my association's filing or my
Yes.
organization?
Yes.
I just feel like we may have a crossover because all of us have multiple clients. So it's just, I think this, I'll add it to comments on
Okay.
future regulations.
Okay.
If it's just a member, not a board member, but a member of the organization that is speaking, does that have to be listed, or only if it's a board member?
Only if it's a board member or an employee. So it's a designated lobbyist would be an employee or a board member or director or officer.
Okay.
Your members that are running around speaking, I don't think you can necessarily keep track of them. The regulations try to be clear, and again, these are the things that we will try to address for you, maybe more formally, in the next rulemaking.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. Can I keep going on this, or then any more questions? Because otherwise, I think we're gonna get derailed on lobby days. Want to do one more?
I'll make it quick.
Okay.
So if I bring students here for a lobby day, and I have them speak directly to how they use a program, I'm cool?
Right. Nope.
Thank you.
The expenses busing them there, for example, that you would report your expenses. And I was going to get into this maybe in another slide, but obviously, well, the law excludes expenses for travel for lobbyists, but not for, like, if you're busing in those French students, for example. The cost of the bus for your lobby day, if you're lobbying at it, that would be a reportable expense. But no, not the French students that are on the bus. Okay? Yeah. Right. Now remember, the board members that should be listed on a lobbying filing are the board members who lobby. And I guess I would take a step back and think about the lobbyist or the board member who is very well connected and is talking to the senator on behalf of the organization they're a board member for, that person, and they're lobbying. That person should be listed on that organization's filing. But we're not talking about the French students. We're not talking about people like that. I didn't hear the second part of your, okay. Okay, I'm gonna try to just move on because we have a huge second half of the presentation as well, but we are not going anywhere. We'll be standing up here afterwards. Okay, for social media, this was an important aspect of the regs also, and it was where we tried to provide guidance and clarification regarding the use of social media in lobbying campaigns. So to get back to lobbying and direct contact, again, with social media, there has to be direct contact. And direct contact with social media means there's a direct link, there's a direct link to the public official. It's not good enough that you post something or the organization posts something on their website or their Facebook page or whatever, and maybe a public official is one of their followers. It has to actually have a direct link. You have to send it to the public official's social media platform or something like that. And I am not a social media person, so I hope that makes sense. Okay, so again, I'm going to also mention this, I hope goes without saying, but whatever we're talking about with social media, again, it has to have a lobbying message. It has to be about a 1cc activity. So a post that you just send out into the universe, if it doesn't make a direct link to a public official, that's not going to be covered. Okay, now here's another part where we are really thinking of clarifying in the regulations and tweaking our position. So I'm not going to get into today whether and when personal social media should be reported. We do have sections on that in the regulations. We are considering, and my hope is that with this new rulemaking, we're going to provide that personal social media posts were not going to be reportable by your employer or whoever, they're going to be presumptively not reportable, your personal social media posts. And that really will be true unless you are specifically hired to use your social media platform. Maybe you have a large one, you're actually paid to do the social media campaign on your personal site. But if not, if you're just whatever you're doing on your own, even if you do it during work hours, your personal social media posts would not be reportable. And that's just something I want to emphasize. So I'm not going to get into that today, but it is something we're thinking of doing. With social media, that is still important to know is, remember, costs with social media can be minimal, but if you're already registered and you're already doing lobbying, you should account for any expenses related to social media if there are any. These are some of the examples that there could be. You might have a search engine optimization that you pay for. That, if it's connected to lobbying activity for your organization, then that would be a reportable expense. Now I'm going to move quickly into grassroots lobbying. So grassroots lobbying, again, the regulations got into pretty good detail about grassroots lobbying and what is it and how is it reportable. A grassroots lobbyist is a person who, or an organization, who solicits another to deliver a lobbying message to a public official. So the audience and recipients of that message that then go and talk to the governor or send something to the governor, they're not the lobbyist. It's the organization that puts out the grassroots lobbying communication. So what is a grassroots lobbying communication? It's these three things. It's a communication that references a 1cc activity. It takes a clear position on that, and it includes a call to action. You have to have all of that to make it a grassroots lobbying communication and make it reportable. So what is a call to action? That's to directly contact a public official or have others to directly solicit others to do the same. One thing that with social media, again, so you could have a grassroots lobbying communication. Let's say you have a billboard. It could have everything up there except for the address of the governor or something similar. So we do have in our regulations, we do, like, if you have your grassroots lobbying communication up on a billboard and then there's a hashtag to like some site where there's a petition or a way or an avenue to here's how you contact the governor, here's how you contact your legislator, that counts. You don't have to have the entire thing up on the billboard. And the regulations go into that, and we can also take questions. If you have any questions on that, we can always be happy to help you over the phone. So these are just examples of how you can do a grassroots lobbying communication. A billboard is a great example. Television advertisements, something in the newspaper. The regulations also talk about how grassroots lobbying can be done by an organization. You can do it on the organization on their own behalf. And then it says here that it's attributable to a lobbyist. So a grassroots lobbying communication is always attributable to a lobbyist, so the entity or the organization. But it doesn't have to list an individual lobbyist. And what I used to say is, if there's no face to the grassroots lobbying communication, if you can't tell who's behind it, you just know it's the organization, then that person who happens to write it or post it is not, they don't have to be listed as an individual lobbyist just by their own, that particular grassroots lobbying activity. So I used to think of it like, if you can't see the face, don't list the person. But with the regulations, we're actually, or with the new rulemaking, we're considering just trying to simplify things and just say, for any grassroots lobbying communication, no individual lobbyists have to be listed based on that activity. Clean and simple, easy. We're hoping to get that done this year. And the other thing I'll just mention is it's obvious, but it's important to understand that a person or an organization can engage in grassroots lobbying activity. Just like with direct lobbying, there are expenses. They might be minimal, but there could be expenses with social media if you're putting a grassroots lobbying communication out through social media. These are some of the expenses you might have, if there are any. This is just like with direct lobbying. Okay, so I kind of went through this training quickly, trying to get time for the Lobby app, which is hopefully going to work great, and we're going to have a live demonstration of it. I went through who you are. and how do you file lobbying reports. So we've gone over beneficial client, we've gone over contractual client. If you have multiple party relationships, we have slides in here about, what role you play and how you might disclose that activity. This includes the sub-lobbyists, the co-lobbyists, it includes coalitions. And then finally, we just went over direct and grassroots lobbying. So I'm going to quickly go through a little bit of reporting requirements. A lot of this is going to be handled in the second half of the presentation, but I just want to go through with the regulations what we tried to accomplish with the regulations and what I feel is still important to talk about. So transparency and better disclosure. So with the regulations, you now have to identify all parties to the lobbying. Again, that's the lobbyists, the clients, the coalitions. There's greater specificity regarding the subjects lobbied, for example. It replaces the old business nature, and this is a much more detailed, a much more specific list, which again goes towards our goal of transparency for the public. We also require you to disclose a bill number, or executive order number, or a description of if there is no such thing. This again will really help with understanding who's lobbying on what. And then one of the key features, and it was a significant change, was the targets of the lobbying, the parties lobbied. So before you used to say, I lobbied the assembly, and nobody would really know who you talked to. Now we're actually asking Assemblyman so-and-so. One thing I do want to point out, and this is for 2020 filings, we actually improved the drop-down list. So instead of having to say staff of Senator Smith, now it'll say I say Senator Smith, if you lobby Senator Smith, there's a drop-down that now says, or you lobby the staff of Senator Smith. Now there's a drop-down list that will say Senator Smith and staff. So whichever one you lobbied, click that button and it goes in. So we're hoping that the drop-down list is much improved, and we're working on that constantly to make it easier for you. We're working with ITS quite a bit. Okay, so the statement of registration, I'm just going to quickly go through this. The only thing that's really different with the regs, and I don't know how many of you are using it or not, but there is this lobbying agreement form. If you don't want to use, if you have a contract, you don't want to submit the whole contract, it could be 100 pages long. It might have things you don't want posted up on the website. You can use this lobbying form, and it takes all the relevant information from our point of view, the compensation, the end and start date, those type of things, and puts it on a form. So we encourage you to use that if you'd like. The other thing is, with terminations, we streamlined that, so now you don't have to tell us you're terminating if it's going to terminate on the date it says, or at the end of the biennial. You no longer, clients and lobbyists used to have to tell us in 30 days if it's terminating on time or terminating at the end of the biennial. You don't need to tell us anymore. The other thing we're considering trying to come up with, because we do get questions on this, is what happens when your client just won't sign your agreement and you're supposed to be lobbying and they won't sign your agreement. They don't get back to you. And I understand that, so we're trying to come up with some kind of situation and way of handling that. And we'll hopefully do that probably with the regulations or with guidance on how to handle that and how might you handle that so that the public still gets the transparency and the disclosure that you're going to be lobbying for this client. But the client hasn't signed yet, so how do we handle that? So we are trying to work on that, and we certainly would welcome suggestions on how to handle that. That's just a way of us trying to help with filing and help in the, practicality, how hard it is for sometimes the lobbyists to get their clients to actually sign it until they actually need you. So that's that. So this is just back to the auto-generated again. I've mentioned it a couple times. I don't want to get into it again, but it's just a really cool feature. It will take all of your information that you put in your bimonthly report, assuming that you're only lobbying on your own behalf, and it'll put it in a client semiannual report. You won't have to do that anymore, and we're hoping that really helps. We also have a new late fee schedule. I'm not going to talk about it. I'm just going to mention, I'm sure you all know, there's a 7-day grace period before late fees kick in. The late fees are a little bit higher once you get to day 8, but we do give you 7 days now to get everything in, and we're hoping that's been useful. Okay, so now we're going to get into the lobbying application in a second. We worked hard on this. It's been a huge undertaking, and no one knows more than that than the three of us sitting up here and the very few amount of people that actually work on filings at Jacob. It's a huge undertaking, but we are very proud of the streamlining features, the interface, but we are constantly working to make it better. It's a work in progress. Also, I'll mention we continue to assist filers who call, and we actually spend a lot of time with you. So I kind of liken this to a doctor who spends a ton of time with you once you get in the door, but you might sit in the waiting room for an hour. That's us. So if you get us, we might not be able to answer your question immediately, but when we do, we will spend as much time as possible. We will walk you through the filing. So we try to give really good service. And just know that that's part of the process, though there's not a lot of us. So we try to get back to you. But when we do get back to you, we're going to give you the most time we can give you to walk you through things.
In this video, we are going to go over answers to some of the most common questions our filing specialists receive. And we are also going to demonstrate in the lobbying application, which I will refer to as LA, how to file certain information. Before we begin this training, I want to stress how hard our small staff works every day to come up with new ideas for the LA, as well as fixes and solutions to some of the glitches. And our IT department really is amazing and has also been extremely helpful with this process. So please be patient as we get the LA to where we all want it to be. It's a work in progress. First, we would like to take a few minutes to talk about profiles. At this point, we are a little more than halfway through the biennial period, and I think most of you have gotten your feet wet in LA and created your individual user profile. We realize some people have found this process to be a little confusing and intimidating. For those of you who haven't yet created a profile, we are going to briefly explain how this process works and what you need to do. The first thing to note is you must have two different types of profiles to use LA. You must have a personal ny.gov user ID and an individual user profile in LA. To start using LA for the first time, you must go through the lobbying application enrollment link located on JCOPE's website. By going through this enrollment link the first time, your my.ny.gov account will be connected to LA, and an individual user profile will be started for you. You will just be required to verify and confirm the profile in LA. To access the enrollment link, you would go to our website, put your cursor over Lobbying at the top of the screen, and select File Online. Scroll all the way down to almost the bottom of the page and select Enrollment Link. This step will link your my.ny.gov account to the lobbying application, and then will prompt you to begin to create your individual user profile. If you do not have a my.ny.gov account, you will be able to create one here. LA will ask you if you have an existing account at my.ny.gov. I'd like to emphasize that if you do have an existing ny.gov account, please review the information before you get to this step to ensure your information is up to date. Your ny.gov info will be used to create your individual profile in LA. We want to make sure it is accurate. Select Yes if you have an existing account at my.ny.gov, and provide your ny.gov username and registered email. Select No if you do not have an existing account with my.ny.gov. LA will ask you to create one now. Once you are done setting up an ny.gov account, you will log into the LA and the system will prompt you to complete your individual user profile information. After these two steps are taken, you will be able to access LA directly through the ny.gov login page. You will not need to go through JCOPE's enrollment link again. There are only two types of profiles in LA. We just talked about the individual user profile, which is owned by the individual. The other type of profile is the organization profile, which is owned by the responsible party, generally a chief administrative officer. Please be aware, organizations that act as both the lobbyist and client, the organization lobbies on its own behalf, only needs one organization profile in LA. Two separate lobbyist and client profiles are not needed in LA. Now that you are logged into your individual user profile, you can create or claim an existing organization profile. On your dashboard, click the Organization button from the Quick Start menu. Here are a few important things to keep in mind when creating organization profiles. The first is type of lobbying organization. Make sure you select the correct type of lobbying organization. Lobbyist or client organization, public corporation, or coalition. If you aren't sure which of these types to select, please click on the blue information icon next to each type so you can understand what each term means. Please note most organizations who file with us are not actually public corporations, as most people think of that term being defined. For purposes of registering and filing with us, a public corporation is not a publicly traded company like Google. It is generally a municipal corporation that does business on its own behalf. For example, counties, cities, towns, villages, so please be sure you select the correct organization type. Next is the organization name. This text field serves two functions. The first, it allows filers to search and claim existing organization profiles, and the second, it allows filers to create new organization profiles. Unfortunately, because LA allows filers to create new profiles, we have been inundated with duplicate individual and organization profiles. In order to avoid creating or claiming a wrong profile, Jacob recommends the following. If only one version of the organization name appears in the drop-down, select that name and click Continue. If the profile you chose has already been verified, a message will appear on your screen. If you see this message, please contact Jacob's help desk for assistance. If multiple versions of the organization name appear, please contact Jacob's help desk so we can help you determine which profile should be claimed. If no organization name appears at all, you can continue creating the new organization profile. Please be aware that if you have previously filed by paper, an organization profile already exists in LA. Every organization profile requires you to identify authorized individuals. A chief administrative officer, and at least one delegated administrator. As the chief administrative officer or delegated administrator of an organization, they can either create or claim an organization profile. In order to have this access, though, these individuals also need to enroll in LA and create their individual user profile. The CAO and DA can be the same person. However, if they are different, only one person should claim or create the organization profile. The other person should be added to the profile so that they will be able to access that organization profile. The CAO or DA can also assign authorized preparers to prepare and submit filings on behalf of the organization. Preparers must be assigned by the organization. The preparer cannot assign themselves to an organization. Preparers cannot remove themselves as a preparer, nor can they add or remove CAOs or DAs. If you are a preparer, you should have a verified individual user profile established, so your organization can add your user ID to their Authorized Preparers tab. The individual ID can be located in the individual user profile by selecting My Profile. The individual user profile will appear and the individual ID will be listed here. This ID number would need to be given to the CAO or DA, whoever will be adding this person as an authorized preparer. Select Edit, and data enter the individual ID number to add this person. Once you have been added as an authorized person by an organization, whether as a CAO, DA, or authorized preparer, you will have access to that organization from your individual dashboard screen. The individual lobbyist names can be added on the profile in this tab. To add an individual lobbyist, select Edit, Add New Lobbyist, and complete the following fields. This section is to identify those individuals who perform lobbying activities on behalf of the organization as employed or designated lobbyists. So if your organization acts as a lobbyist, we recommend you add all your individual lobbyist names to your organization profile before submitting a statement of registration. These names will then be readily available for you to use when submitting your filings. Do not include the names of your retained lobbyists in this section of your organization profile. Your retained lobbyists are responsible for their own profile and filings. You can add an individual lobbyist on the statement of registration, but we recommend adding the names while you're in your organization profile. After you complete or update your organization profile information and select Submit, a pop-up will appear asking you about NYBE, New York Business Exchange. What is LA actually asking you for? Any organization that does business in New York State is required to register with New York Department of State, who provides registered business names, addresses, and DOS numbers to NYBE. So LA wants to connect your DOS information with your LA profile so it has the most up-to-date information. LA will display a pre-populated list of registered organizations that match your name. If your organization matches one of these registered organizations, click the green My Org button. If your organization does not match any of the registered organizations displayed to you, click None Match. Once you have completed the profile steps, you will be able to see your organization profile under the Affiliated Organizations widget, and if you had filed by paper, all your previously submitted filings. Now you have taken the steps needed to access LA, set up your individual user and organization profile. You are ready to file any required reports. Next, I am going to discuss some of the most common issues we see with registration filings. As mentioned earlier, we've seen a large amount of duplicate organization profiles being created in LA, especially when contractual and beneficial client names are being added to a registration. To begin a registration, select Registration under the Quick Start menu. If you file on behalf of many organizations, select the organization name you are filing on behalf of from the drop-down menu. As you can see, your principal lobbyist information is added to the business card at the top of the screen. Obviously, if the contractual client is the same as the principal lobbyist, you can select the Add button and the profile information will populate the contractual client name on the business card above. However, we see a lot of duplicate profiles being created when the contractual client name is different and needs to be inputted in the field. When you start to type in a contractual client name, LA will display existing organization profile names that it thinks are a close match to what you are looking for. Sometimes multiple names appear and you may be unsure whether one of these profiles is the profile you need. So instead of selecting one of these available profiles, you create a new organization profile. Now another duplicate organization profile has been created, and you were confused by the multiple profiles that displayed to you just now. Now you've added one more, which may create more issues for more filers and JCOPE staff. JCOPE can correct this issue. However, if you can take some extra steps to try and avoid the creation of a duplicate profile in the meantime, it would be extremely helpful to both filers and staff. So please keep this in mind before deciding to create a new organization profile. If available, you should always choose a profile that has already been verified. Verified profiles display with a green check mark next to its name. So when you see this, choose that one. However, if more than one version of the name appears with a green check mark, please contact JCOPE so we can make sure to link your filing to the correct organization profile. Next, I just want to remind you that any beneficial clients disclosed on a registration must emanate from the same agreement or authorization. This means every beneficial client listed on a registration must be pursuing the same issues and lobbying activities being conducted by the principal lobbyist. Otherwise, separate registrations must be submitted. Because we have already created this registration for this presentation, we are just going to select it so we can continue. However, this is the spot where you would select the Start button next to the period you need and begin your registration filing. First, we realize having the registration display the Co and Sub-Lobbyist tab first can be confusing since this information is not required. And it's not even applicable for most filers. We are working with our IT department to move this tab further down. However, if you are required to disclose co- or sub-lobbyists, please review JCOPE's definitions since New York City's definitions are different than JCOPE's. I also want to point out that co- and sub-lobbyists are not individual lobbyists. Again, the blue information icons are a great source of information and can provide you the definitions of co- and sub-lobbyists for your New York State filings. Next, we are going to open the Agreement Information tab and talk about contract duration and compensation fields on an amended registration. We are aware there is some confusion as to what specific information is required in the contract duration and compensation fields when a registration amendment is submitted. I think the contract duration field is pretty self-explanatory. It should correspond to the period of time referenced in the amended agreement or authorization. The compensation field, however, is a little different. It should reflect the amount of money they are actually getting paid within that contract duration. Let me give you a couple of examples. Let's say a lobbyist is registered to lobby for a specific client on a state level. The contract duration is 1/1/2019 through 12/31/2020. And the compensation is $1,000 per month. The client then requests the lobbyist also lobby on the local level for a contract duration of 7/1/2019 through 10/31/2019, and they will pay an additional compensation of $500 per month, assuming the client provides an amended agreement to the lobbyist. To report this, you would select the green Add Lobbying Agreement button. You would upload the new revised agreement. You would then select the radio button next to Anticipate the $5,000 threshold will be exceeded. And under Reportable Compensation, you would select the radio button, Reportable Compensation and Expenses. Then you would select the green Add button under Contract Duration and Compensation. You would add the date of 7/1/2019. next to the start date, and then the end date would be 10/31/2019. Then you would select the green add button on the compensation line, and you would type in $1,500, and you would select monthly in the rate field. Then you would select add. Please remember it is required to enter the client's signatory here each time a revised agreement or authorization is uploaded. This is how the filer would indicate this additional duration and compensation on their registration amendment. The contract duration would show 7/1/2019 through 10/31/2019, and the compensation would show $1,500. This way, the registration amendment is disclosing the total amount the lobbyist will be receiving from this client during this time period, the original $1,000 plus the additional $500 for that duration. Here's another example. A filer has a lobbying agreement that shows compensation is $5,000 per month for a specified contract duration. Now let's say the lobbyist and client agree they are going to waive the fee for the month of November, which is within the contract duration. How would the filer indicate this on a registration amendment? The filer would upload the amended agreement letter. The contract duration would show 11/1/2019 through 11/30/2019, and the compensation would show as 0. Please be aware when there is a change in compensation, whether it's more or less or even waived, the filer must select the radio buttons just mentioned on the Lobbying Agreement tab so the new compensation amount can be disclosed. You would select Add Lobbying Agreement. You would upload the new revised agreement, select Anticipate the $5,000 threshold will be exceeded, and then select Reportable Compensation and Expenses. This is the only way to report a compensation amount. We know there are many more possible combinations, and we encourage you to reach out to us so we can work with you on the best way to disclose this information for your specific situation. One additional thing we want to point out that if your contractual client changes their name, you will not be able to change or correct the name by submitting a registration amendment. They must update their organization profile before you can submit a registration amendment. However, once they update their profile, the name will automatically correct when you create your registration amendment. When you go into the registration amendment, a pop-up will appear telling you this profile has been updated. Just select OK and continue. At this point, you will just need to upload the revised agreement and provide the effective date of change. Next, we are going to be briefly talking about bimonthly reports. Remember, an active registration must exist before a bimonthly report can be submitted, because the submission of the registration and the principal lobbyist contractual and beneficial client pairing needs to be established before you can begin the bimonthly report. To begin the bimonthly report, select Bimonthly under the Quick Start menu, the principal lobbyist organization name in the drop-down, then click Select next to the registration, and you will be able to start a bimonthly for the applicable reporting period. All information disclosed on the first bimonthly report submitted in the biennial period will pre-populate to the next bimonthly, so the filer will only need to make necessary changes applicable to the reporting period before submission. Please be aware certain information is directly imported from the data disclosed on the bimonthly reports or amended bimonthly reports to the client semiannual. We'll get into this in more detail in a few minutes when we talk about the client semiannual. There are 3 important things to remember when filing the client semiannual report. The first is every client semiannual must list a contractual client and at least one beneficial client. The second is the contractual and beneficial client can be the same. And the third is contractual clients are responsible for the client semiannual report, except for the source of funding. The beneficial client is responsible for the source of funding. To begin a CSA, you would select Client Semiannual under the Quick Start menu. The organization name in the drop-down, and then select Start for the applicable reporting period. As we mentioned earlier, LA will automatically attach or import certain information to your CSA for you. Source of funding filings and reportable business relationship filings submitted by your beneficial clients are attached to your client semiannual report, including any amendments filed. The type of client you are determines which information is automatically imported from registration and bimonthly reports to your client semiannual. For example, if you are a contractual client who lobbies on your own behalf and uses the services of retained lobbyists, the names of all beneficial clients reported by your principal lobbyist on their registration display here in the Beneficial Clients and Source of Funding tab. The names of each principal lobbyist who has listed you as a contractual client on a statement of registration, this includes your employed lobbyists, are listed under principal lobbyist information. The level of government and compensation amounts paid to your employed lobbyists reported in your bimonthly reports. Please remember there are no reimbursed expenses for employed lobbyists. In the Principal Lobbyist tab, you are required to disclose the compensation and reimbursed expense amounts paid to your retained lobbyists. This information is not automatically imported. Just select the blue Edit button to report this information. Any itemized expenses reported in your employed bimonthly reports will be imported over, and any lobbying activities reported in your employed lobbyist bimonthly reports will be imported over as well. We'll discuss the lobbying expenses and lobbying activities tab in more detail in just a few minutes. The majority of the auto-populated or imported information is from employed bimonthly reports. This information cannot be removed or edited on the CSA. You must submit an amended bimonthly report to change any information auto-populated to a client report. Pursuant to Commission regulations, contractual clients who only lobby on their own behalf, they act as the lobbyist, contractual, and beneficial client, are not required to file a client semiannual. Instead, the lobbying application will create a system-generated semiannual report for you when a source of funding is submitted by a beneficial client. The information is directly imported from the data disclosed in the bimonthly reports covered during the applicable reporting period. This feature is only available to an organization who lobbies on their own behalf. They do not use the services of any retained lobbyists. No filing fee is required for a system-generated client report. For example, a system-generated July-December client semiannual would contain the information disclosed in the July-August, September-October, and November-December bimonthly reports. Submission of new or amended bimonthly reports during the applicable reporting period will update the system-generated semiannual so it will always contain the most up-to-date information. Let's talk about your filing requirements if you retain the services of a lobbyist after a system-generated semiannual has been created. You will be required to amend the client report to add the retained lobbyist information, and you will be required to pay the $50 filing fee. Once the system-generated client report is amended, it is important to remember that it is no longer recognized as an auto-generated filing. So if any employed bimonthly amendments are filed, the application will no longer automatically amend the semiannual. You will be required to file an amended client semiannual to update the information. Let's take a few minutes to talk about itemized expenses on the client semiannual report. LA imports all itemized expenses reported on your employed bimonthly reports to the CSA for the applicable semiannual reporting period. Please remember this information can only be updated by filing an amendment to the applicable bimonthly. These itemized expenses are imported and listed here on your CSA. So please do not disclose your employed lobbyist itemized expenses again on your client's semiannual because this will result in double reporting. The only itemized expenses you are required to add to your CSA are related to your retained lobbyists. Itemized expenses reported by your retained lobbyists on their bimonthly reports do not import to your client report. To add itemized expenses reported by your retained lobbyists, select Add and complete the following fields. Please be aware we recently included additional itemized expense purpose categories in the lobbying application. So please be sure to review the new list before you decide to manually enter a purpose. Let's now talk a little bit about lobbying activities. Lobbying activities include the focus type, the focus including the specific bill, resolution, executive order, the identifying number if known, or description of the focus, the type of lobbying communication, and the names of the parties lobbied on the specific focus. Proper disclosure of these lobbying activities necessitates a level of specificity that makes clear to the public exactly what and who is being lobbied. We realize this is a lot of information, and we've tried to make this screen as user-friendly as we could while getting the disclosure required by the regulations. Let's review a few key points. If no reportable lobbying activity was performed during the reporting period, you can select No in the drop-down. As you can see, the screen resets to pretty much a blank page. Obviously, if lobbying activity was performed during the reporting period, you would select Yes and provide the required information. We've had filers ask how they should report lobbying activities that were performed on both the state and municipal level on a specific focus. You do not need to list this focus more than once. A combination of state and municipal level parties may be included on any state or municipal level focus, bill, resolution, procurement. So let's walk through that. Let's say you perform lobbying activities on both a state and municipal level for a municipal bill about single-stream recycling in the town of Bethlehem, New York. You would disclose this focus once and associate all the parties lobbied to that one specific municipal bill. On the Lobbying Activities tab, under the Lobbying Focuses box, you would select Update. Then under Type, you would select Municipal Bill. Choose your communication. Then click the Add Description if identifying number is unknown. Under the communication, you would select again direct lobbying, grassroots lobbying, or both. And you would type in single stream recycling in the town of Bethlehem, New York. Then select Add. Once added below My Selected Focuses, you would select Close, and the focus would be listed in the box. Now you need to add the parties you lobbied on this municipal bill. The first step is to add the specific party lobbied for the town of Bethlehem, New York. If you met with the supervisor of the town of Bethlehem, you would manually input the information as follows. Select Update under the Parties Lobbied box. Then you would select Click here to add party name if not found. Under the government body, you would select Town. And in the party name field, you would type in Town of Bethlehem, New York, Supervisor. Select Add, and Town of Bethlehem, New York Supervisor would be listed under Parties Lobbied. Since legislators' names are provided in the drop-down for selection, begin to type the party name in the party field to see a list of names you can choose from. When you see the name, select it and it will be added to your Parties Lobbied section. We are going to be adding Doug Smith. You would select his name in the drop-down and it would appear in the Parties Lobbied section. Once you have added all the party names you lobbied, click the green Add button. You can see that these party names have been added to your Parties Lobbied box. To add this information to your filing, in the Focuses box, select the checkbox next to Single Stream Recycling in the town of Bethlehem, New York. In the Parties Lobbied box, select the checkbox next to Town of Bethlehem, New York Supervisor and Doug Smith. This information will display in the preview box. Click Add underneath the preview box and this information will be added to your My Selected Focuses section. You have now disclosed a focus once that was lobbied on both the state and municipal level. It will be easier to distinguish who is who once the government body is added to the My Selected Focuses section. Now, if you have lobbying activity to report but did not actually lobby a specific party, you may select the Monitoring Only checkbox once the focus has been added to your My Selected Focuses section. You are going to add your focus by selecting the green Update button in the Focuses box. Select the type of focus from the type field. Choose the type of communication performed. Add the focus number or description in the focus number field. Then select Enter. You can see that the bill has now been added under My Selected Focuses. Then select Close. Now the focus is added to your Focuses box. In the Focuses box, select the checkbox next to the focus. The focus will then display in the preview box. Click Add underneath the preview box and the focus will be added to your My Selected Focuses section. Then, select the Monitoring Only checkbox. Now let's talk about lobbying activities reported on your employed lobbyist bimonthly reports, as well as those reported by your retained lobbyists on their bimonthly reports. Lobbying activities reported on your employed lobbyist bimonthly reports are directly imported to your CSA for you. Please remember you must submit an amended bimonthly report to change any lobbying activity information auto-populated from your employed bimonthly reports. Lobbying activities reported by your retained lobbyist bimonthly can be directly imported to your CSA, including parties lobbied and communication type, as of the submission date of the client's semiannual. Just select the Focuses Reported by Lobbyists link on the Lobbying Activities tab and select the checkbox next to the retained principal lobbyist name. All checkboxes can be selected. The information is then added to your My Selected Focuses section. As you can see, your employed lobbyist information is automatically checked, and the information is already added to your My Selected Focuses section. Lobbying activity populated to your semiannual from a retained lobbyist bimonthly report cannot be changed. However, The activities can be removed after they have been added. Please note that removal of a lobbying activity on your client's semiannual does not affect the information reported by your principal lobbyists on their bimonthly reports. As we mentioned earlier, beneficial clients are responsible for the source of funding section of the CSA. However, source of funding disclosure requirements only apply to the beneficial client if the contractual client is required to file a semiannual. For example, if the contractual client is under threshold and therefore not required to submit a client report, any beneficial clients affiliated to that contractual client would not be required to submit source of funding, unless the beneficial client is also affiliated to a different contractual client who is required to submit a CSA. So as a beneficial client, you have to know who your contractual clients are and whether they are required to submit a CSA or not. To file the source of funding, you would select Source of Funding in the Quick Start menu. Then you would select the organization in the drop-down and click Start. Beneficial clients required to submit source of funding must ensure the contractual client they are affiliated to is properly disclosed on the source of funding statement, so the lobbying application can attach it to the correct client semiannual. If you are unsure which organization name to select, please contact JCOPE for assistance to make sure the source of funding is correctly paired. LA gives filers the ability to either manually data enter each source of funding contribution or fill out and upload the pre-formatted Excel spreadsheet. To upload the source of funding pre-formatted Excel spreadsheet, you would select the upload icon, and to manually data enter each contribution, you would select Add Source of Funding. LA will automatically amend any associated CSA to attach a source of funding once it is submitted by the beneficial client. LA will also automatically amend any CSA to attach any source of funding amendment, so the client report always has the most up-to-date information. Lastly, I'd like to discuss the difference between an effective date for an individual lobbyist and an effective date of change for an amendment. When adding an individual lobbyist, the effective date is the earliest date that person was authorized to lobby for the organization for at least one of their clients. This date is used to determine that person's online ethics training requirements. The individual effective date does not necessarily have to be within the current biennial period. A filer is required to provide an effective date of change for every amended filing. This is the specific date that changes in the filing will be or are effective. This date can be different than the submission date. For example, if a registration amendment is submitted to extend an agreement authorization, the effective date of change would most likely be the agreement authorization start date, not the date of submission. Please remember there are many different video tutorials that are available on our website that can provide you more detailed information on a variety of different topics and filings. These videos are located under Lobbying, Lobbying Application Information, Video Instructions. We also encourage you to contact us with any questions or issues you have. We'd much rather have it done right the first time so we don't have to do it again later. If you have any questions, please contact JCOPE's Help Desk at 1-800-87-ETHICS. When prompted, press 1 to speak to a lobbying filing specialist or email the help desk at helpdesk@jacob.ny.gov. If you have any legal questions about the information reported on your filing or any legal questions regarding the new lobbying regulations, please contact Jacob's Attorney of the Day at 1-800-87-ETHICS. When prompted, press 2 to speak to the Attorney of the Day or send an email to legal@jacob.ny.gov. Thank you for listening. We covered a lot of information in this presentation. I know it was a lot to take in, but we truly hope this was informative and helpful for you.